Played this the other day on my stereo.
(6:49 a.m. Thursday, June 15. Lyrics less than song title Anointed Wrath Song lyrics You better watch your tongue. Don't mess with the anointed prophets of God. They're chosen and appointed, they got a power that you can't comprehend, and if you cross them, there's gonna be an end. Consequences come when you play with fire. These prophets ain't nothing to admire, they got a mission from the Almighty, and if you mess with them, it'll get mighty. Don't mess with God's anointed ones, they're protected by the Holy Son. You'll face the wrath of the Almighty if you cross the line. You'll be mighty. These prophets got a voice that can shake the earth, they got a message that can give birth to a new world, a new way of life, and if don't Linton all na the arena continue. (6:49 a.m. Thursday, June 15. Lyrics less than song title Anointed Wrath Song lyrics You better watch your tongue. Don't mess with the anointed prophets of God. They're chosen and appointed, they got a power that you can't comprehend, and if you cross them, there's gonna be an end. Consequences come when you play with fire. These prophets ain't nothing to admire, they got a mission from the Almighty, and if you mess with them, it'll get mighty. Don't mess with God's anointed ones, they're protected by the Holy Son. You'll face the wrath of the Almighty if you cross the line. You'll be mighty. These prophets got a voice that can shake the earth, they got a message that can give birth to a new world, a new way of life, and if don't Linton. (6:49 a.m. Thursday, June 15. Lyrics less than song title Anointed Wrath Song lyrics These prophets got a voice that can shake the earth, they got a message that can give birth to a new world, a new way of life, and if you don't listen, you'll pay the price. Consequences for those who don't obey God's anointed prophets. They don't play, they got a mission that they must fulfill, and if you get in the way, it's gonna be real. Don't mess with God's anointed ones, they're protected by the Holy Son. You'll face the wrath of the Almighty if you cross the line. You'll be mighty, so listen up and heed the warning. Don't mess with the prophets in the morning, they got a message that needs to be heard, and if you mess with them, you'll be blurred. Continue.
And next are the discoveries that were found the very next day.
Fusilier v. State, 1997. Supreme Court of Mississippi. Eric Fusilier aka Eric S. Fusilier v. State of Mississippi. Number 96-DP-00045-SCT. Decided October 23, 1997. Background. Pilcrosign 2. Eric Fusilier was convicted and sentenced to death for the April 25, 1983 murder of Rose Gunter during the commission of a felony. Gunter was found in her bed, gagged, blindfolded and stabbed 41 times. 2 days after the murder, Fusilier, who was an escapee from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, attempted to flee the home of Leslie Corley on foot. However, He was caught, arrested, tried, convicted of the murder and sentenced to death. In his first appeal, this court reversed Fuseliers' conviction and sentence and remanded the case for a new trial. Fuselier v. State, 468, SO.2d 45, Miss.1985, Fuselier I. Upon remand, a plea bargain was arranged allowing Fuselier to plead guilty to both capital murder and burglary in exchange for a non-recidivist life sentence for the capital murder and a consecutive 25-year sentence for the burglary. In his second appeal, this court reversed Fuselier's conviction for capital murder and burglary again. We remanded the case for a new trial because of the failure of any separate indictment charging the offense of burglary and because sentencing the defendant separately for both felony murder and the underlying felony violated the Double Jeopardy Clause. Fuselier v. State, 654, SO.2d 519, Miss.1995, Fuselier II. Fuselier was retried in the Circuit Court of Jones County, convicted of capital murder yet again, and sentenced to death on December 14, 1995. The trial court set an execution date of January 16, 1996, but the execution was stayed pending resolution of Fuselier's timely appeal to this court. 2. Evidence of Fuselier's flight. Pilcrow 3. At Fuselier's second trial, the state adduced evidence that when law enforcement officers arrived at the home of Leslie Corley 2 days after the murder of Rose Gunter to arrest Fuselier and his co-indictee, David McPhee, Fuselier jumped out of a window in the back of the Corley house and began running toward the woods. The officer chasing Fuselier racked his shotgun and ordered Fuselier to stop, which Fuselier did. Fuselier now contends that the evidence of flight was improperly admitted in his retrial. He argues that this court, in its first opinion regarding this case, held that the evidence of flight could not be admitted. Pilcrow 4. Generally, it is a well-established principle that flight is admissible as evidence of consciousness of guilt. Williams v. State, 667, SO.2d 15, 23, Miss.1996. However, an instruction that flight may be considered as a circumstance of guilt or guilty knowledge is appropriate only where that flight is unexplained and somehow probative of guilt or guilty knowledge. Reynolds v. State, 658, SO.2d 852, 856, Miss.1995, quoting Fuselier I, 468, SO.2d at 57. When determining whether a flight instruction is appropriate, this court further has explained that two considerations are paramount: 1. Only unexplained flight merits a flight instruction, and 2. Flight instructions are to be given only in cases where that circumstance has considerable probative value. Brown v. State, 690, SO.2d 276, 293, Miss.1996. Banks v. State, 631, SO.2d 748, 751, Miss.1994. A flight instruction is appropriate where flight is highly probative to the facts of a particular case. Evidence of flight is inadmissible where there is an independent reason for flight known by the court which cannot be explained to the jury because of its prejudicial effect upon the defendant. Williams, 667, SO.2d at 23. Pilcrow 5. At his first trial, Fuselier argued that the evidence of flight was not probative of his guilt or guilty knowledge of Gunter's murder because, as an escapee, he had an independently sufficient reason to flee. Fuselier I, 468, SO.2d at 57. This court, in Fuselier I, explained that Fuselier was obviously put in a no-win situation by either being required to explain his flight and the fact that he was a prison escapee or not explaining the flight and subjecting himself to a flight instruction. It The court held that the flight instruction should not have been granted because the trial judge was aware of an explanation for Fusilier's flight, but the jury was not. If Fusilier's flight is probative of his guilt or guilty knowledge of the Gunter murder, it is equally probative of his escape. Pilcrow 6. In Fusilier's second trial, the state again offered evidence of Fusilier's flight, but did not offer an instruction on flight. Therefore, the jury was allowed to draw the same inference that this court determined that the jury should not have been allowed to draw in the first trial, namely that Fusilier's flight was probative of his guilt or guilty knowledge in relation to Rose Gunter's murder. Nonetheless, evidence of Fusilier's flight was also probative of his escapee status. Pilcrow 7. Marie J.V. State, 495, SO.2D 507, Miss.1986, and Jimpson v. State, 532, SO.2D 985, Miss.1988, both cited by Fusilier, are not applicable here. In those cases, this court permitted flight instructions where there was evidence of flight and no independent reasons for flight. The juries were instructed in those cases that they could draw inferences of the defendant's guilt from the evidence of the defendant's flight. As stated previously, there was an independent reason for Fusilier's flight. A more appropriate case for comparison is Mack v. State, 650, SO.2D 1289, Miss.1994, wherein this court reviewed a situation similar to that of Fusilier. Mack, the defendant, was charged with capital murder, and at the time of his flight was an escapee from prison. At 1309, this court again held that where evidence of flight is probative of things other than guilt or guilty knowledge of the crimes charged, such evidence should be excluded. Further, this court reasoned that if a prosecutor cannot give a jury instruction on flight because evidence of flight is probative of things other than the defendant's guilt or guilty knowledge, it follows that the prosecutor should not be allowed to place the evidence before the jury. At 1310. Pilcrow 8. The state admits that it could not and did not give the jury an instruction on flight because the evidence of Fusilier's flight was probative of things other than his guilt or guilty knowledge. Therefore, the flight evidence was improperly admitted under Mack, 650, SO.2D at 130810, to which the state also admits. Now, however, the state argues that this error was harmless, relying on the harmless error analysis employed in Mack. Justice Banks, writing in Mack, described the evidence tending to establish Mack's culpability. Mack's two companions testified that Mack killed Fulton. Mack was placed at the scene of the murder by other witnesses. Mack told Fulton's neighbors not to go near Fulton's home. There was blood on the truck that Mack was driving, which Mack attempted to wipe off. Mack threatened to kill a teenager if the youngster mentioned what he had seen. The evidence of Mack's flight pales in comparison to more direct evidence of guilt. Its admission under the circumstances was harmless error. Mack, 650, SO.2D at 1310.
Anointed Wrath Song lyrics. You better watch your tongue. Don't mess with the anointed prophets of God. They're chosen and appointed. They got a power that you can't comprehend, and if you cross them, there's gonna be an end. Consequences come when you play with fire.
A federal grand jury in Indianapolis has just indicted a man who is accused of killing a Terre Haute police detective.
Shane Meehan is accused of shooting and killing Greg Ferenczi last summer. Ferenczi was walking out of the Terre Haute FBI building when prosecutors say Meehan ambushed him. Meehan faces life in federal prison or the death penalty